It was 1943, and the skies over Europe were filled with smoke, fire, and the roar of airplane engines. A squadron of American B-17 Flying Fortresses took off on a dangerous mission, deep into Germany to destroy weapons factories and vital resources. Among the crew was Jack Harper, a 22-year-old pilot on his very first real mission. His heart raced with both excitement and fear. He had never imagined that soon he would face choices that could determine the lives of everyone on board. Next to him was William "Bill" Kennedy, his co-pilot and best friend. Bill tried to ease the tension with jokes and smiles, but even he couldn't hide the dread of German fighters and anti-aircraft fire that awaited them. The engines roared, and the heavy bombers lifted into the sky. Above the clouds, the calm was deceptive. Every moment could be a pilot's last. As they approached enemy territory, the German radar picked them up. From below, dozens of FW-190 and Bf-109 fighters ascended to intercept. Jack's stomach twisted with fear as the first bursts of flak lit up the sky. Among the German pilots was Franz Stigler, skilled and feared for his precision and bravery. He had orders to shoot down the Americans. But as he closed in on Jack's damaged B-17, he saw smoke pouring from the engines and wounded crew struggling to keep the plane steady. Something inside him shifted. For a moment, Franz hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. The young Americans had no idea that one pilot's mercy might change everything. The bomber shuddered under enemy fire, and Jack gripped the controls tightly. Bill shouted orders over the roar of the engines. Every second felt like an eternity, and the sky was a deadly maze of fire, smoke, and metal. For Franz, the decision would define not only this battle, but something far greater, a choice that no one could have predicted. The sky above Germany was a chaotic storm of smoke and tracers. Jack's bomber shuddered with each hit from flak, and alarms blared inside the fuselage. Crew members shouted over the roar of the damaged engines, trying to keep the plane steady. Suddenly, a shadow crossed the sun. A German fighter was closing fast. Franz Stigler's FW-190 sliced through the clouds, guns blazing. Jack instinctively pulled the yoke, trying to dodge, but the bomber was already too slow. The first rounds tore into the tail, and the plane rocked violently. The navigator yelled, "We're losing altitude." Jack's palms were slick with sweat, but he forced himself to focus. Every movement, every adjustment could mean survival or death. Franz circled, ready to fire again. But then he saw the faces inside the bomber. Young men, wounded and terrified, desperately struggling to hold their plane in the air. The engines smoked, a wing was dented, and yet they refused to give up. Something inside Franz wavered. His finger hovered over the trigger, but he couldn't bring himself to fire. He had a choice no one expected: follow orders or follow conscience. Instead of attacking, Franz climbed alongside the bomber, keeping it in his sight while scanning the skies for other threats. Jack and his crew had no idea they were being spared. They thought the German fighter had come for another pass. For miles, Franz flew beside them, guiding them out of the most dangerous territory. His hand lifted in a brief salute, and the bomber pressed on toward safety. Jack felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had survived impossible odds, but the reason remained a mystery. The bomber struggled to stay in the sky. Smoke poured from the damaged engines, and the wings trembled with every gust of wind. Inside, the crew's nerves were fraying. Jack's hands were raw from gripping the controls, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of another enemy attack. Then it happened. Another German fighter appeared, but this time it wasn't firing. Franz Stigler maneuvered close to the B-17, and the crew could see him clearly for the first time. His face was tense, eyes focused, but there was no anger, only a strange calm. He gestured with his hand, a signal the Americans could barely understand. "Follow me," it seemed to say. For a moment, disbelief filled the bomber. Were they hallucinating? Was this a trick? Franz flew alongside them for miles, guiding them out of anti-aircraft zones and avoiding patrols. At one point, a burst of flak exploded dangerously close. Jack's heart leapt into his throat, but Franz positioned himself between the fire and the bomber, effectively shielding them. The crew whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what was happening. "He's helping us, but why?" Bill muttered, astonished. No one had ever imagined mercy in the middle of war. Hours passed like minutes. Franz's decision to spare them, to guide them to safety rather than obey orders, was shocking not only to the Americans, but also to himself. The weight of what he was doing pressed on him. If anyone discovered his mercy, he could face severe punishment. Yet he couldn't bring himself to destroy the lives he saw before him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the edge of German-controlled territory appeared. Franz saluted briefly, a gesture full of respect and unspoken words. Then he banked sharply and disappeared into the clouds, leaving the Americans to continue their flight home. The bomber crew stared after him, speechless. They had survived a situation that should have been their end. Yet the pilot who had spared their lives remained a mystery. For Jack, Bill, and the rest, that act of unexpected compassion became a story they would carry for the rest of their lives. The bomber had finally cleared the worst of the flak and enemy territory, but the crew was exhausted and injured. Jack's hands ached from gripping the controls for hours, his arms trembling with fatigue. Bill and the other crew members were pale, yet alive, miraculously so. Suddenly, one of the engines began to sputter dangerously. Smoke filled the cabin, and alarms blared again. The plane was barely holding together. Panic threatened to overtake them, but Jack forced himself to focus. Survival depended on every small decision now. Then, out of the clouds, a familiar silhouette appeared. Franz Stigler had returned. No one knew why, but there he was, flying alongside the battered bomber once more. The Americans could hardly believe their eyes. Franz maneuvered his fighter so that it blocked the bomber from the last remaining threats, creating a corridor of relative safety. Jack realized that Franz was risking everything, his life, his honor, even potential punishment, to see them safely home. At one point, anti-aircraft fire exploded just feet away. The bomber shook violently, but Franz positioned himself perfectly, absorbing the danger himself. The crew could only hold on and trust this stranger who had become their guardian angel. Finally, the outskirts of friendly territory appeared. Franz gave a short, sharp salute, a silent farewell, and disappeared into the clouds one last time. The Americans were free, stunned into silence by the bravery and humanity they had witnessed. Weeks later, back in America, the bomber crew shared the story. No one could believe it at first. A German fighter pilot, sworn to destroy them, had chosen mercy over duty, bravery over orders. Jack and Bill never forgot Franz Stigler, the man who had saved their lives against all odds.